The Codex Trials, Level 1. For everyone who notices the patterns no one else sees. The Codex does not reward strength. It rewards understanding. Chapter 1. The Fracture. The thing about patterns was that nobody wanted to hear about them. Ethan had figured that out around age 11, when he'd pointed out to a math teacher that the answer key on page 312 had a typo in problem 17. The decimal was in the wrong place, and the teacher had given him a particular kind of smile, the kind adults reserved for children who were being a problem.
After that, he kept his observations to himself, mostly. Not out of shame, just that he'd learned early that noticing things was a private activity, like picking at a scab. Other people found it off-putting if you did it in front of them. So he stacked boxes. Harrow's grocery had 46 aisles. Every Tuesday evening between 6 and closing, Ethan broke down pallets in aisle 29, canned goods. Each carton weighed around 9 kilos. He could do the math on how many he'd lifted in his life by now, and he tried not to, because the number was depressing, and because doing math on it would be exactly the kind of thing his math teacher had smiled about. It was the light that stopped him. He was halfway through cutting a shipment of chickpeas when the fluorescent above him did something it shouldn't have done.
Box cutter paused, tape unslit. Ethan looked up. The tube ran the length of the aisle, the way they all did. One of those thin, buzzing things that had been buzzing since he'd started the job 3 years ago and would keep buzzing long after he quit. It flickered sometimes. They all flickered sometimes. You stopped noticing within your first week. This one wasn't flickering like the others. It was doing it in a pattern. Buzz, pause, buzz, buzz, pause, buzz. 3, then 2, then 1. Ethan stood very still. His right hand still held the box cutter. His left hand was pressed flat on the chickpea carton. He was aware, in the same low-level way he was always aware of things, of the squeak of a trolley 2 aisles over. Irregular. Nothing. And the argument of a couple near the front of the store about whether they needed the large or the medium jar of something. Normal sounds. Normal evening. He waded through the pattern a second time to be sure. Buzz, pause, buzz, buzz, pause, buzz. 3, 2, 1. Okay, he said, quietly, to nobody. That's not a light. He set the box cutter down on the carton, carefully, the way you'd set something down when you didn't want to startle it. He looked around. Nobody else had noticed.
The cashier 2 aisles up was scanning items with the 1,000-yard stare of the retail employed. The arguing couple had moved on to a different aisle, still arguing. A kid somewhere was asking for something and being told no. The whole store was doing what stores did on Tuesday evenings, breathing slow, indifferent breaths, running on the autopilot that kept a species of 2 billion people fed. None of them were looking at the light. Ethan watched through another cycle. The pattern held. 3, 2, 1. And then, on the 4th cycle, changed. Not broken, not faulty, shifted. The new pattern was 2, 1, 2. A different sequence, as if whatever was running the first one had decided he'd had enough of it and was moving on to the next question. Lights don't update, he thought, and the thought arrived with a precision that alarmed him. It wasn't a superstitious thought or a scared thought. It was a structural observation. Lights had no mechanism for updating themselves. The thing in front of him was doing something its physical substrate was not built to do. His mouth had gone dry. He took a step forward, then another. The air in the aisle seemed to have thickened, which was not a thing air did, and the buzz of the tube seemed louder than a buzz of a tube should reasonably be. On the next flicker, the world stuttered.
He didn't have better language for it. The shelves in front of him did a thing. Not physically, not sound you could point to.
But for a fraction of a second, something that had been aligned slid out of alignment. And where the shelves met the metal frame, Ethan saw a symbol. Etched, or maybe projected, or maybe remembered across the front of the shelving unit. It was sharp and geometric in a way the store's other graphics were not. 3 shapes. A triangle inside a square, inside a circle. Nested, clean. There for less than a blink. Gone. Ethan's pulse did something complicated. And at the same moment, precisely, simultaneously, the back of his neck tightened. Not the tight neck of fear, the tight neck of being looked at. The small animal reflex that tells you someone behind you has turned to watch you and hasn't looked away. There was nobody behind him. The aisle was empty. The looking was coming from somewhere else. Through the metal, behind the symbol, behind something. Okay, he said. This time the word came out smaller. Okay. He reached out and put 2 fingers against the shelf. The metal was cold.
Ordinary. The chickpea carton below it was just a chickpea carton. There was no symbol. There was no distortion. There was a 30-year-old stockroom employee leaning forward like an idiot, touching a shelf for no reason. He laughed, a short, nervous sound that surprised him when it came out, and shook his head. Yeah, he said, I need sleep. He turned to go back to his pallet. The buzzing stopped. All of it. Not just the fluorescent above him. All the fluorescents. The refrigeration units along the back wall. The faint hum of the ice machine by the deli counter. The PA system's permanent low whine. Every mechanical sound in the store. Gone. At the same moment, as if someone had reached up and pulled a plug. Ethan turned very slowly. The cashier had stopped moving. Her scanner hovered an inch above a yogurt. Her face was composed into the neutral expression she'd been wearing a second ago. And it was composed there now, as if the muscles had decided to take a break from the work of being her.
The arguing couple had stopped arguing. The woman's mouth was open. The man's hand was raised. The argument had been mid-sentence. Nothing was breathing. Ethan tried to say hey and discovered that his voice could not be heard. Not by anyone else, and, after a strange, hollow moment of trying, not by him either. The word left his mouth and went nowhere. The air wasn't carrying sound. He looked down. The floor under his feet was no longer tile. It was still tile. He could see the grout lines, but underneath the tile, or inside it, or behind it somehow, a grid had begun to glow. Thin lines, perfectly straight, radiating outward from where he was standing in a pattern that he recognized a moment later as coordinate axes. The kind you drew on graph paper. A place where something was being measured. At the exact center of the grid, right between his feet, the symbol was back. Triangle, square, circle, nested. Watching him. Oh, he heard himself say, though he didn't hear it. Oh, that's bad. The symbol began to move. The lines of it rotated against each other, segments sliding into new positions with the dry, mechanical precision of a lock tumbling open. Triangle, square, triangle, square. A sequence building itself in the air in front of him. Then a gap. The sequence stopped, mid-beat, and waited.
Ethan's whole body had gone still. Somewhere behind the silence, his heart was hammering, but the silence was so total that he couldn't hear it, which was almost worse. His mind, however, his mind, which had been noticing patterns since he was 11, which had been quietly tracking the flicker of a faulty light 10 minutes ago, his mind understood what the gap was. It was a question. A test. The sequence was triangle, square, triangle, square. And the next term wanted to be triangle, he thought.
The world shattered. Sound came back like a door blown open. The fluorescent above him roared back to life. The cashier's scanner beeped. The couple resumed their argument. Medium, I said, medium. Exactly where they'd left it. And Ethan staggered sideways against the shelving, his legs suddenly unreliable, his hands groping at the chickpea carton for balance. Something was in his head. Not a voice, not a thought. Something being inserted, the way you inserted a key into a lock, with no ceremony and no explanation. A single sharp sensation at the base of his skull, and then, like an image developing in water. Trial detected. The words hung in front of him for less than a second, floating clean.
Not on anything. Not projected onto a surface. Not a hallucination he could argue with. Laid over the world. They flickered once and were gone. The store was a store again. The scanner beeped. The couple argued. Somebody's kid started crying 2 aisles over, in the particular register of a child whose parent had just refused them something with finality. Ethan stood with both hands on the chickpea carton, breathing like he just sprinted 100 meters. Nobody was looking at him. Nobody had looked at him the entire time. Whatever had happened to him alone. Not to the store, not to the couple, not to the cashier, who was still scanning her yogurt without any awareness that the scanner had, a second ago, been frozen an inch above her hand. Ethan looked down at the floor.
The grid was gone. The tile was just tile. And somewhere in the back of his head, in a place he hadn't had before this moment, a place whose existence he could suddenly feel with the same precision with which he could feel the weight of the box cutter in his hand, something had begun to tick. Quiet, steady, patient, watching him back.